Hello, everyone. Thanks very much for tuning in. I've got Dalrymple MacAlpin with me, who is an absolute multi-potentialite, by the way, has many talents. Would you like to introduce yourself, please? You're okay, by the way?
I'm okay, yeah. Thank you for having me on, pal. Thank you. My name is Dalrymple MacAlpin. I am a composer, a playwright, a storyteller, a puppeteer, and a poet. And all of these art forms coalesce sometimes into one show where I will encompass many different facets in one performance. And I hail from the Great Lakes state of Michigan, from Detroit, Michigan, in fact. And I would say my earliest influence in the world of the arts would be Motown.
That's amazing. That's very inspiring indeed. And you do deal with heritage a lot and what method in the past. I would like to ask you, what aspect of folklore inspired you most? What drew you to it?
I think what aspect of folklore really appeals to me is the transmutable, shape-shifting quality that folklore tends to have. I realized one day, it was like an epiphany, like a light bulb, that folklore was not dead, that it is a living, breathing entity that is ever expanding and evolving and growing and changing as we ourselves do that. And folklore is the lore of the folk, right? The lore of you and me. And it is created by the peasant class, usually in remote antique times. And those who fostered their heritage upon the soil of folklore were rich in other ways, maybe not living in castles, but they were rich in a storehouse of knowledge they had. But folklore to me it means many things. It takes the form of a riddle, a ballad, a song, a story, or even a belief that you hold, or a superstition that you believe in. And it is the power of folklore that influences our lives every day that I find fascinating. One of the reasons I find fascinating, I remember when you asked me that question through when we first started corresponding, and I was talking about the language of folklore, and that language being like a code or a symbol which contains something greater than itself, that folklore in itself is a mystery, and it could be just a pleasing story or a tradition that you practice once a year or every so often. But if you look deeper into it, you find something else. There's a mystical meaning within. And I was reading about the Irish mystical tradition, the magical system in Ireland, and about the Well of Wisdom. And at the Well of Wisdom, there grows 9 sacred hazel trees. And at the same time, the hazels sprout leaf, flower, and nut. And the hazelnuts are the source of what makes the well wise. And I thought the nut was a great metaphor for wisdom and mysteries, because there is the outer superficial meaning that you perceive, right? When you look at the nut, and then you crack it open, you have to crack it open to reveal the mystical hidden meaning inside. And so that is sort of what folklore is to me, and why it is so fascinating.
Active dreaming and bridging worlds. It does embody everything that is meaningful to humanity. So your love to folklore did create a very, may I say, very unified aesthetic. I think it's very admirable. You're very unified. You still represent what mattered in the past. Could I ask you, what are you trying to pass on with this art?
Well, if I could pass on anything, it would be to pass on light, laughter, and joy into the world, because we need more of that. I think that's certain. And I would like to pass on inspiration, because I love what I do. I wouldn't do what I do unless I loved it, of course. Well, you would expect that. And when I see someone else engaged in their artistic practice, whatever that may be, whatever form it takes, and I can tell that they are so passionate, that they believe in what they are doing, and it fuels me with this energy to emulate that and create that in my own work. And when people come up to me after a performance and they say, I was so inspired by that show, I'm going to go home now and create my own works, and I now want to play music. And I see that fire in their eyes, that spark. That is what I want to pass on. It's what in like Irish and Celtic tradition is referred to as the fire in the head, the awen, the inspiration. Where do these ideas come from? Why do we do what we do? It's another mystery, but I would like to pass on that gift.
Being attuned to one's destiny. And I love that symbolism as well, because it's sort of universal. There are some saintly images with flames above one's head. What do you think about our current contemporary relationship with fairy tales? Do you think it's doing fine? What do you think?
Well, that's a good question. I think that the folk memory within most people nowadays is pretty dim at best, sadly. But there are so many people in the world now that maybe the majority don't have a resonance with folk tales and fairy tales and fables, but those who are not the majority we are growing in numbers as well, right? And so there does seem to be a resurgence of interest in these things. There's countless books you can find about what is the deeper meaning behind fairy tales? What are they teaching us? What is the obsession our culture and our world has with myth? And there's books being published about this, albums being written. I myself have written several albums about this. And in my day-to-day life, everyone that I am exposed to and who comes to a performance is on this level of wanting to go deeper into mythology and folklore and fables and fairy tales. So for me, in my world, I would say that yes, it's our relationship with this tradition is expanding and growing, and it's thriving, and it's healthy and strong, and we will survive. But there is that, those other folks out there who, who maybe don't believe in magic, right?
Mm-hmm.
But they do believe, because I think people have this fear of what is not comfortable, what is alien and foreign to them. And you want to maintain normalcy and what is comfortable and what is reality. And so all those other sorts of worlds out there, you put your blinders on and you go about your day-to-day life, and you do not believe. But there's like this is my intuition speaking. I sense that there is a fear in people to believe. And then I realized, they do believe, because you do not fear what you do not believe in, right?
Yes.
If you have that instinctual feeling and that there's something to be feared, by embracing this other aspect of life and tradition and magical culture, then in fact you do, somewhere within you do believe.
That's correct. I had very rational, very, law-abiding, proper people being very scared of magic. For no reason, they did not reason it why, but they were very scared. And interestingly enough, what you just said about the folk community, the least fairy tale-y thing in the world, that is the internet, that helps that community a lot, I think. Could I ask you, I do see embodying the storyteller archetype, sort of. I do see a little bit of, may I say, Bombadil Tom as well from the Lord of the Rings. The careless, sort of above the menial problems. Can I ask you what your favorite archetype is, or what's the closest to you from all there is?
The archetype, yeah. Well, if we define the archetype as the psychic organs of the mind, that's one definition, right? And then the other definition, which I really like, is psychic structures or elements that influence our unconscious. So our unconscious is being influenced by these psychic elements. And so to answer that question, that would mean I would know exactly what my unconscious is being influenced by, but then it wouldn't be unconscious anymore. It would be conscious, consciousness, right?
Mm-hmm.
I could try to answer that as best I can, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Studying different archetypal patterns and reading a bit of Carl Jung, the archetype of the seeker resonates with me strongly. And this has been my path throughout my whole life. I have gone always on a quest, always on an adventure, always never satisfied, always hungry for more, and always ready for something new, and wanting to distill and call the collection and refine the vision. And this is my archetype. That was the psychic structure influencing me, I believe, the seeker. Sometimes to my own detriment, perhaps, because people who have been fans of past eras of my musical path wouldn't necessarily be fans of this new era, right? And so I find my audience is always changing. You see a certain band, right? And they have a sound, and all their albums are sort of, you know what you're gonna get before you even go into it. You kind of have your expectations, but I can't repeat myself, not through any conscious choice. It's almost that this is just what I have to do. I need to try something else. And you can seek, but you can never find. If you are a seeker and you're seeking endlessly, but you're never finding anything, well, that's no good. But I do find many things in these quests. And what I find is what I basically release out into the world as albums or stories or performances or plays. This is what I find when I'm on an adventure out in the world, or even here at home, working on my own practices in my studio. I take what I find, I put it into a form, whatever form that may take, as a riddle, as a musical album, as a story, and I put out into the world. And then I can, once it's published and it's like an artifact you can hold in your hand and put on your record player or whatever, once it's published, then I let it go, I rest, I distill, and I begin again something totally different. So yes, I would say the seeker, this has been so for 37 years, is how old I am now. And so I don't know if this will always be the archetype that influences my psychic structure of my unconscious. This might change, but for now, the seeker prevails.
Right now, it's quite all permeating. When you said seeker, does it have a hermit shade to it? Because it did remind me a lot of the hermit from the tarot cards when you were describing it.
I am a hermit in numerology, a number 9.
Number 9, yeah.
I am a number 9, and I have always resonated with the hermit, and it's manifested in various ways where, I was told by my first employer as a teenager, Dalrymple works well alone. You work really good just all by yourself out there in that room in the greenhouse, working with the plants and stuff. And I realized that I don't mind to be alone. My dad is the same way. He's a lone wolf. And maybe it's something that's in our ancestral heritage, but I do have a family now, a son and a fiance, but I do value my alone time.
For some reason, that was evident, even without me knowing much about, your lifestyle. You do that. You do have that energy or vibe to you. So when did this start? Were you always very sort of folklore-y, or when did that love, for the subject start, or for this not even subject, cosmology even?
Was I always folklore? I like that word, folklore. We need to add that to the dictionary. I'm going to put that in a play or something, pal, and I'll credit you. Don't worry.
You say it's not a thing already? That's That's terrible. We need to fix that.
We need to. Yes, maybe this podcast, the Untitled podcast, will fix this.
Absolutely.
Oh,
Let's bring light to the people. So yeah, do you
yeah,
even have a beginning there, or?
I think I do. I have always been drawn to these other worlds as I was a kid, and I wouldn't have called them other worlds then. I wouldn't have had that language at that time, but I would see things, strange things around me, and it would be unexplainable phenomena. I won't go into it right now, but just to say that there was some unexplainable, strange, um, not hallucinations, just something else coming through the veil that I was witness to as a child. It was powerful. It was like seeing life breathing, sitting out on my porch and looking out and seeing the air moving and the whole earth breathing and being and having the sense I can freeze time and time just slowing down. And it was really strange. And then other things I would see, and I wouldn't rush to tell my father or my mother. I would just sort of silently observe as a bystander, and I wasn't afraid, but I was fascinated. And you ask when this love of folk culture this started, and when you asked me that question, I realized I think I do know the exact, can pinpoint the exact moment in time. So I grew up in Michigan, very cold, at least it was when I was a kid. Huge sheets of snow, icicles the size of, pickup trucks hanging from the house. And I was looking out my window one December afternoon, in my bedroom. I was about 7 or 8 years old. And on top of the snow, as I looked, I saw this tattered old brown leaf just stuck on the snow. And in the leaf, I saw the face of this old and tired man, shriveled up in the leaf there, and just looking at me. And I was staring at this leaf for I don't know how long, and I was overcome with this intense this intense empathy. I felt so bad for that leaf. He was out there, he was freezing, and he was looking at me, and he was trying to communicate something, and I knew what I had to do. I had to go out there and bring that leaf in so he would be warm, and bring him into my room and talk to him. And it's a trek to do that because you have to put on your snowsuit and your boots and your gloves and your scarf and your hat. I'm a little kid, I had to like bundle all up, waddle out to my outdoor window spot there, and there was not one leaf anywhere to be found. The leaf was gone. I was so sad, but at the same time, I sensed that maybe this leaf had come to communicate something to me, that I didn't need to touch it. I didn't need to be right next to it at that moment, but I needed to have the memory of that experience through the window. And it stuck with me, I will say. I remember it as clear as a day. It has not faded one moment. It left a deep impression on me, this leaf. So when you ask that question, I would pinpoint it to that moment, that I was opened to this world of magic and this world that something beyond myself, something greater than myself, like my first glimpse of the gods.
Mm. You see people trying to get by desk jobs, and you're having transformative encounters with nature spirits, it seems. That's very substantial and inspiring. That's so beautiful. I'm just going to leave it to that. I think the rest of the visions and experiences, I will just let it for others to imagine. From the already present works of our heritage, folk tale heritage, can I ask you what folk tale speaks to you most?
Yeah, that's a tough question. It really depends on what mood you're in. But what I'm working on right now, for the past year, I've written this story song cycle based on the stories of the Irish divine hero poet Finn McCool, and I call it Illumination Tales. And it's this motif of illumination and the thumb of knowledge that runs firstly through Irish mythology. It crops up in Welsh mythology in this amazing story in the Hans Taliesin, the life of Taliesin. And then it crops up in Norse mythology, Icelandic saga, the saga of the Volsungs with Sigurd, when he burns his thumb on the heart of the dragon Fafnir and puts it in his mouth, and he's viewed with the ability to understand the speech of birds. But it can be traced back to Irish origins, and this is all consuming to me. I have read so many books about this subject. I'm writing 3 books myself about this: Illumination Tales 1, 2, and 3. The first all about the Irish tradition of Finn McCool, the second with the Welsh Taliesin, and the third with Sigurd. And so, yeah, favorite tales, the tales that revolve around the thumb of knowledge and the early Finn cycle tales, because in these stories, there's often these lacuna in the text that just leaves you guessing what would have been there, what, and rather than it just being all tied up neatly with a bow, and there's the story, and from beginning to end. But when there's little bits missing in these old, very old stories that are preserved in these like 8th century manuscripts, and the story itself is just a paragraph, and it's just kind of the bare bones. There was probably a storyteller walking into the monastery, and there was the scribe, and the storyteller was probably going off in this incredible, flowery, beautiful language and poetry, and the scribe he's got a cramp in his hand, He's been doing illuminated letters in the gospel all day. He's like, we'll put this like heritage stuff of our folk culture in this book too, but I'll just condense that down to a little paragraph perhaps, and they'll figure it out. And so, but it's kind of it's kind of interesting because I get those little paragraphs, and in my work with what I'm doing with Illumination Tales is to piece them together and then create the missing parts that link them to create a whole narrative which has much more depth and characters, but still is true to tradition. Everything that I write has to ring true with tradition. And in fact, I feel connected working with Finn McCool and being so drawn to his cycle of mythology. In Ireland, it's devoted to a whole branch of Irish mythology, the Fenian branch. And to touch the heart of Gaelic culture is to study Finn McCool, because he has been evolving and changing with the people of Ireland for almost 2,000 years. And he never, storytellers are loath to write a death story for Finn McCool. He never really dies. He just keeps going, and he keeps changing and evolving to this day for almost 2,000 years. And so by delving so deep into his mysteries and his tradition, I feel this very strong connection to all the storytellers of ages past who have also applied, some of their life's work to preserving his stories.
It's interesting. Excuse me, if I might be ignorant to the English version of it, but in Hungarian folk tales, there is actually a finishing phrase, very common one, that is, "If you don't believe it, you should go after it." And that's exactly what you just described. That smaller story, do some research, is going to be an entire life, life meaning revealing journey.
Yeah. So in the Irish tradition, what happens with Finn McCool, and the most well-known story of that in Ireland is the salmon of knowledge. So the salmon resides in the well of wisdom, eats the hazelnuts, which we talked about, are the source of tenomlegia, the shining of the intellect. And the salmon swims down the river, and he is caught by would-be poets who are seeking to catch the salmon of knowledge and eat it and be imbued with all the mysteries of the world. And so Finn McCool, when he's a boy, his teacher, who is this old poet named Finn Ices, catches the salmon of knowledge, and he entrusts his student, Finn, to cook it for him. And while Finn is cooking it, there's a blister. There's different versions of the story, but some there's a blister that grows on the belly of the salmon, and Finn thinks, oh, something so beautiful, something so perfect as this salmon could be marred by a blister. And so he puts it down to push that blister away. Oh, but he burns his thumb, and that's the most well-known story of Finn becoming gifted. But the oldest is from the 8th century, and it's where he gets his thumb caught in the door of a fairy fort in the other world after he's killed one of the inhabitants with this magic spear. And he goes to retrieve his spear from the shrunken body of this dead fairy being, Dalrymple MacAlpin. And as he's doing so, he gets his thumb caught in the door. And when the door opens, finally, he instinctively thrusts the thumb in his mouth. But while it was stuck, the inhabitants within poured water from the well of wisdom on his thumb. And so he was gifted with those drops. This is the last story I tell in the Finn cycle that I do. And I thought, well, I don't want him to be rewarded for killing Dalrymple MacAlpin. It's sort of not Finn in his best light. And so I thought, well, and then he's being given this gift. So I worked it in the story that the mother of Dalrymple comes out and she says, yes, I give you this gift. And this is the third and final qualification of becoming a poet, imbus pharasnai, which is the great wisdom of enlightenment, the penetration of inspiration itself. And she says, I give you this gift, but know this, my gift is also my curse. For by tasting the water from my well upon your helpless thumb, you shall unite your knowledge with dreaded wisdom, and you will be cursed by knowing tomorrow what yesterday holds in its hands. Yes, so he knows what's going to happen at every moment, cursed by knowing yesterday what tomorrow holds in its hands. Switch that around. So to always know and to never guess, that is the lonely road of unhappiness. And this is what Finn McCool says at the end. The broad road there which has no end, this road I choose instead. So rather than taking the road that is narrow and that has no joy in it, that all mystery has been revealed, what is the point of going on? You know, he chooses the broad road that has no end.
And knowing all brings us to an interesting subject there. That is, I would like to ask you, what's your relationship with contemporary magic? It almost leads into fairy tales a lot, quite often.
Okay. Well, my relationship with contemporary magic is a strange one. Everything I'm interested in is not very contemporary. It is of the past, but I do practice magic and have been drawn to different magical practices since I was a teenager, doing it seriously then. What I do with music and performance and puppetry is all magic to me. The act of writing a piece of music is a spell. A performance is a ritual. I take it very seriously when I'm working on what I'm doing. It all has a meaning to me and a theme which runs through it. And there's a reason for what I'm doing. And the harp string or the note of the piano when the key is pressed, or the vocal cord and the power of the word that is spoken. And these words and these sounds, these are frequencies which I think are heard by those who lived the story. And then I feel that I'm channeling those beings, whether they gods or heroes or fairy tales, characters from fairy tales, whatever they may be. There is some resonance out there that they pick up, and then it comes through me when I'm performing. It's not always, it's different every single time. I never really know what's going to happen at a performance, but I always am left with the feeling that something came through me that was far greater than myself, And I ask myself often, where does this come from? Why am I so compelled to do what I do and spend so much energy, my whole life, doing this? This takes up my whole life, and I am entrenched in it. Where does this come from? Why? Why do I do this? And it is, I feel that I'm being in touch with something just far greater than myself, is how I can explain it. Where this music comes from, where this drive and this passion, that these stories need to be told, these voices need to be heard, and there needs to be someone doing it. And this seems to be my path. I have chosen this, and these spirits have chosen me. So my relationship with magic exists right now in the form of of channeling, of being in touch with these ancient beings and spirits and communicating them to people during a performance. Or right now, because of COVID, I've been able to transmit some of this through these new films I'm creating, the Illumination Tales film series. But yes, magic is something that is ever present in my reality, and that I'm always thinking about in one way or another.
Magic is everything, and it's a great insight to know that you're, well, it depends on the philosophical branch, but you're basically interacting the world of ideas, if we can go like ancient Greece, through your performances, or whatever you call them, entities, spirits. I did see a lovely illustration on your website. Do visit Dalrymple's website, by the way, because it has some lovely artworks and everything you need. Your dose of folk. So I did see a lovely illustration there from Benjamin, which had some interesting magical occult symbols on it, mostly Druidistic symbols. One is the Awen. Am I okay to just ask you to show our audience your ring? Is that okay? I think that will be very interesting. By the way, for people who don't know, this is the Awen there. It's a very prominent Druidistical symbol. And there were the snakes as well that we can see on some of the occult illustrations. Long story short, I would just like to ask you what was the inspiration behind these very interesting symbols on your image, on your representative illustration?
Yes, these druidic symbols. Um, I had Benjamin Vierling, who is the fine artist that painted that portrait for me, and very specific things on there, such as holding a hazel branch with the nut referencing the hazel of wisdom and the nuts of poetry, and the book with the Awen symbol, which is the symbol of inspiration. Little side note about this symbol, it's actually no older than the 1800s, the 19th century, when it was conceived by this sort of Welsh madman who was addicted to laudanum and was just kind of a fanatic zealot of bardic mysteries. And his name was Iolo Morganwg, might be pronouncing his last name incorrectly, but Iolo would sit in his castle and he would write these crazy books, these huge pamphlets and pages of works, and he would say that they were historical, ancient, preserved bardic manuscripts that were not authored by him, that he just had in his possession, you know. But a lot of these were written during these hallucinations that he'd be having under laudanum, right? And so I wear this symbol in honor of Iolo, actually, because I feel that he was channeling something too. His books are really amazing, actually. Even if he was just totally inventing all this stuff, it was flowing through him. He was tapped into something, and it does have a resonance. And this symbol, the Awen symbol, has been picked up by different druid orders all over the world. And so there's something about it, these three rays coming down with these three drops of inspiration. It's just an interesting fact about that symbol that I wanted to share. My connection to druidry is very strong. I first saw the word druid in a book of magic when I was a teenager, and I didn't know anything about druids. I didn't know who they were, but just the word druid And that word alone, it lit a fire in my head, and I would write the word in my journal with huge illuminated letters, all ornate, druid. And I'd just stare at it. And I just, whatever a druid was, I knew that that was my path, and that's where I needed. These were my people. And I learned more about druids, and oh, there's this connection between the word druid tree. And so I became fascinated with the oak tree and using acorns and different spells. And I built my first stone circle out in the woods where my parents' house, where the property ended, the woods began. I was very fortunate. There's just all this woods out here to wander in. And in the woods was this hill, and I built my stone circle on top of this hill and did many druidic ceremonies out there. And if the druids to this day, just the word still has that same power for me. And I have found no other path that I could say I resonate with more strongly than the druidic path. Yeah, Iolo Morganog, who I reference also in this song I wrote, a 20-minute piece of music called The Trickster Fairyman and the Morning of the Magicians. And in the Morning of the Magicians half of the piece, I do this long list of different wizards and witches throughout history and mythology and even pop culture, because Yoda crops up in there, and Willy Wonka. And Willy Wonka, you know, he's part of folklore now, right? That's an example of folklore just like growing. He's become an archetype of himself.
This symbol was very important in neo-paganism when it started. You do seem to be an incarnated druid. Do you believe in reincarnation, may I ask?
Yeah, that was one of the first things I read about druids. I mean, there's really not a lot is known about the druids. That tends to be like something that I'm drawn to, things that no one knows anything about.
You will have to you will have to astral project and figure out, unfortunately.
You will have to, yes. But yes, I do believe in reincarnation, and everything that I am interested in my life's path so far, how could I not?
So there was a lot of past. There was a lot of, archetypes there, eternal values in a way. What does the future hold for you? Contrasting that, what do you think?
Well, in the very near future, I plan to go to Ireland. In fact, I was supposed to be in Ireland right now. It's been 4 years since I was there. I'm definitely getting the itch. And I was going to be there this Samhain to record the illumination tales at 3 sacred sites. And so as soon as that becomes an option to travel, I will be going to Ireland with my family and different recording engineers to do a film and a live recording of these stories and public, which contains facsimiles of the original manuscript pages where the stories are contained, and then photos of the landscape where these stories took place, and then my own writings about my path with these tales. And then there'll be 2 CDs with the whole story song cycle. So yes, the future, publishing illumination tales. So you can hold, it can be something you can hold, and then I can let it go. And something I've been working on for 11 years, yes, that long, is the Rumpelstiltskin marionette opera. So
Of course.
I'm also, yes, of course. So I'm writing, Rumpelstiltskin. He's sort of my namesake and my best friend. And he came to me one night, and he came to me and he sang the, and I remembered the song. I tried to record it that night, but you can't record the spirits, and my field recorder had run out of batteries. So I just remembered the melody. And it's become my life's purpose since then, 11 years ago, to tell this sort of backstory. Like, how did he get his power to spin straw into gold? Where does he come from? Who is he? And I've been delving deep into Rumpelstiltskin lore and carving marionettes to tell his story, and writing an opera, and traveling to Germany and Prague to study puppetry over there so I can learn how to carve puppets. And this is what I've been doing for the past, decade or more, working on this. I feel like this is going to be the biggest thing I've yet released into the world. And so that is most assuredly on my future. And working with my wife in collaborating, she does photography and film. And we've been working right now, collaborating on the Illumination Tales series. So I look forward to definitely working more with her and collaborating together.
Well, everyone, do make sure to check it out. I will link the web links down there so they can follow the process and be ready. It does happen, however, not to alarm anyone, but each time I have done a very juicy ritual that worked so well, each time I tried to text the results to someone, everything would collapse, freeze. It wouldn't happen. I will be prevented. So it does happen. When you're experiencing a miracle, it's for you, unfortunately. You just need to avoid making life a waking dream or nightmare with too much freedom. But anyways, you had some amazing answers in here. I'm sure it was very inspiring for anyone who was seeking it. I would like to thank your time and being here with us and telling a little bit, just a small particle of your, big life creation so far.
Thank you for having me, pal. I'm honored to be on the Untitled podcast, and I appreciate you reaching out to me.
And I appreciate you giving it a title for us, or at least something I could borrow. Thank you very much. Well, take care and thanks very much again.
Farewell.